Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be continuing on with the stash busting, and I say we, I mean me, obviously. Hopefully this is inspiring you to, tackle your stash. I think the creative endeavor here is really just thinking about looking at the fabrics that we do have and thinking about how we can use them, especially because oftentimes you'll get like weird lengths of fabric, like you don't have a nice rounded off number and you're like, what do I do with this, right? So hopefully this is kind of inspiring you, this whole series, I guess. We have a long ways to go. We still have all of this. And all of this, we've managed to make a little dent up here. I don't know if you can see that in camera, but I also have more fabric over there. So if you're new here, hi, I'm Olga and I make sewing content that is usually vintage inspired and sometimes a little bit nerdy. We're going to be making a little summer dress. Sadly, the original intro that I filmed for this, where I show you the fabric, something weird happened with the footage and it's really not usable. So I can't show you the fabric right now, but you'll see it when I lay it out on my table to show you how to cut it and all of that. My original plan actually was to use Gertie's Ultimate dress book. I wanted to make this dress right here. You have the simple bodice and a A-line skirt, really straightforward. Let's roll into it. So today I am going to be working from the living room where I'm using the dinner table, which is like nice and big, to do some drafting. I had an idea to use a specific pattern. I was going to use something from Gertie's Ultimate Dress Book. I love the design, but I actually was thinking about it and I don't want to copy out all of those pattern pieces. So I thought about it and I was like, it'd be fun and it'd be really cool to show this on camera. How I do this, because I do this quite often, is how I use like different parts of patterns and then like mash them up and like Frankenstein them into one look. I'm going to be using my trusted McCall's 8161. So I am going to have to do a couple of things in order to use this as the bodice. Just shorten it because obviously I need this to be cut off at the waistline instead of going all the way to like the hip area. So I am going to be making a second set. The other thing that I want to do is, hi Zeus. You can hear a little tippy tappies. I need to draft an all-in-one facing for this because I know this has facings, but it's just for the neck because obviously it's supposed to be done with sleeves. For the skirt, I have a little skirt pattern in here, and this is skirt 109 from Burda. This is from their June 2019 issue. It's quite an old one. And it's just an A-line skirt I've used a bunch of times. This was like the first pattern I ever tried. I had tried making things before that like I didn't use patterns for, and I just like cut it out of the shape out of the fabric, and that didn't work out. To make a copy of the pattern, I just place the pieces I want to copy out over my wrapping paper and trace using a ruler and a pencil. Here I'm copying over the darts, notches, the apex, and the waistline. I'm pretty sure I'll be making alterations to this in the future, so I want to make sure I have all of the information I might need to make life easier for future me. For the straight lines, I used the ruler, and for the rounded lines, I gently traced around the original. I marked the waistline and then added seam allowance to it. I like to add the same amount used in the original pattern so it's nice and easy to remember. Once I had the copies, I started drafting the all-in-one facing. Again, I start by tracing the top of the pattern over to the new bit of paper. The parts I need to include are the armhole, the neckline, the shoulder seam, and a small portion of the center front or back and side seams. I also like to copy the notches to make sewing easier. Now this pattern has a dart at the shoulder on the back piece, but I don't need the dart on the facing because it's going to be smaller than the whole back piece. So I went ahead and closed the dart before tracing it. You could keep the dart if you wanted to, but you'd then have to sew an extra dart that actually has no purpose. Then it's time to shape out the facings. You can make them as long as you want and in whatever shape you want.
but mine are about 8 centimeters or 3 inches long at the front, back, and side seams. And then I rounded them off in this kind of wave shape. I didn't add seam allowance to this edge because I normally either zigzag or serge the raw edges of facings, but if you have a different finishing technique in mind that does require some seam allowance, then you should add some here. This fabric is kind of weird to describe. I got it in December. My partner's aunt was doing a little destash and she gave me a few fabrics. I do have a video linked in the cards where I shared that. But anyway, this is a navy woven fabric with some stretch to it. It sort of looks like a chambray maybe. I have just over 1.5 meters of this and it has been pre-washed, which is not typical for me. But yes, it's totally ready to go. I had to try out a few different placements with this because I was having a hard time getting all of my pieces on there, especially because I want my big pockets, and because of the stretchiness of the fabric, I didn't really want to mess around with like cutting things off grain. In the end, I decided that the best compromise was to just cut the front facing piece not on the fold because it's a facing and it doesn't matter if it has a seam at the center front. So I just added the seam allowance to it and call it a day. Then I started to cut everything out, and this was a weird one because on the cross grain, this was super easy to cut, but on the grain line, it was kind of like bouncy. It's so hard to describe. It was like cutting through chewing gum if chewing gum was fabric. I also think that my shears need a little sharpening because I have been using them regularly for about 5 years and I have yet to sharpen them like at all. The chrome finish on the handles is actually starting to fade from how much I use them. I do recommend these shears though. They're the Milward rose gold ones and they have different finishes, but I think this is a really good quality pair of scissors for a really reasonable price. I have linked them below along with all the materials and tools that I use in this video, apart from things I got secondhand or that I don't have a link for. But yes, if you're looking for a decent pair of fabric scissors that won't break the bank, this would be my recommendation. You do have cheaper ones, of course, but all of the cheap fabric shears I have tried have not lasted very long. And you also have more expensive ones, but honestly, I haven't tried more expensive ones, so I can't really attest to their quality or durability. Time to transfer the markings over to my fabric, I like to cut out my notches, then transfer the darts. Here I used Tailor's chalk because none of my heat erasable pens showed up in this fabric. I need to get another one of those, but in white. Anyway, as I transfer the darts, I also go ahead and pin them flat. I'm sure this is not the first time I've shared this, but when I started sewing clothing, I found darts really intimidating, and it actually took me a couple of years to figure out a dart process that actually worked for me. Because of this, I used to sew all of my darts right at the start of the project so that I could have it out of the way, and it's just kind of a habit for me now. Oh, and with fabrics like this where you don't have a clear right and wrong side of the fabric, I also often draw a line on the wrong side of the fabric with my marker at this stage to make life easier for me while I'm sewing. sew the darts, I start at the white part of the dart, making sure to backstitch here, then sew over the lines, and when I get to the tip of the dart, I do not backstitch, but leave the thread tails along. I also stitched the front facings to each other along the center front. When I had all my darts sewn, it was time to press them. I start by taking the long thread tails at the tip of the dart and tying them off a few times, and then I chop off the excess, leaving about an inch behind or a couple of centimeters. Sometimes they're really tangled, so I like to use a pin to help me untwist them. And then I press all of the darts using my tailor's ham. This fabric was not particularly easy to press, so I did find using my clapper very helpful for this project. Next, I moved on to putting the bodice together. I'm pinning and sewing just the side seams of the bodice and the facings together and leaving the shoulder seams free for now. Usually I would sew both the side and shoulder seams at this stage, but because of the way I want to attach the all-in-one facing, I'm leaving them for now. Here, I also went ahead and zigzagged the bottom edge of the facings. Once I had pressed all of the side seams open, I placed the facings over the bodice with right sides together and started pinning. I'm only pinning the necklines and armholes up to the seam allowances of the shoulder seams, leaving the shoulder seams free. This is super important for this method of sewing an all-in-one facing. You can use this method for sewing linings of other sleeveless garments, and it's very commonly used for waistcoats. When I have all of those seams pinned, I stitch them, making sure to backstitch at the start and finish of every seam. I trimmed the seam allowances and flipped it to the right side out so that I can press everything in place. And then it's finally time to sew those shoulder seams. So I start by pinning the shoulder seams of the bodice with right sides together and stitch those down, leaving the shoulder seams of the facings free. I press the shoulder seams open with the help of my tailor's ham, and then I tuck the seam allowances of the bodice's shoulder seams under the facings. You can trim them if you want to. Next, I fold the seam allowances of the shoulder seams of the facings under and press to get a nice folded edge. Then I sew that seam closed by hand. I used a very quick whip stitch here, but I could have used a ladder stitch to make it totally invisible. I also decided to add some top stitching to the neckline and the armholes, mostly because it would help this kind of bouncy fabric stay put, but also because I thought it would look cute. Then it was time to move on to the skirt. I'm obviously starting with my pockets. I pin one pocket piece to each side seam of the skirt with right sides together. I stitched them all in place, making sure to backstitch. Then I trimmed the seam allowances of these seams and moved on to pressing them. I'm pressing the pocket and seam allowances all away from the skirt so that I can understitch the pockets to help them stay in place. Understitching is a similar technique to top stitching, but you're just stitching the facing or the pocket or the lining to the seam allowances to help prevent them from moving around. It serves the same kind of functionality as top stitching, but without the stitches being visible on the right side of the garment. If you're looking to practice your understitching, I would highly recommend you do that with your pockets because they're a really easy seam to handle. Once I had all of the understitching done, I pressed the pockets again, this time pressing them into their correct location and getting a lovely crisp side seam, which is exactly what I was looking for. Next, I placed the front and back pieces of the skirt with right sides together and started pinning the pockets and the side seams all in one go. I like to start by pinning the side seams up at the waistband together just to keep them in place, and then I start pinning down the side of the pocket and all around until the side seam of the skirt. Here I make sure that the side seams of the pocket area are lined up, and I put a pin in that area too. I also pin about 8 centimeters or 3 inches up the side of the pocket to close it up so that my little pocket treasures can't fall out. And last but not least, I pin the rest of the side seams together down the skirt. That's pretty much how I sew them too. Then I trimmed the seam allowances of the side seams and the pockets, and obviously I finished those raw edges with a zigzag stitch. It's now time to join the bodice and the skirt, so I like to start by pinning the pockets to the front of the skirt so I don't get turned around later. Then I place the bodice over the skirt with right sides together and start matching the side seams and pinning out to either side from there. Here I ran into an issue that is super common when you do mashups like this, which is that the shape of the bodice and the shape of the skirt are different at the waistline, and this means that your seams don't really match up. In this case, I have more bodice than skirt at the waistline. I could have made a mock-up and tapered the bodice to the size I needed it to be, but obviously I did not do that. I could now use maybe gathering, for example, but I didn't feel like doing that, so I decided to go with a box pleat at the center front. This meant that I still kept the fit of the bodice and that the waistlines would still match. At the back, I left the extra fabric out because I was thinking of trimming it back later, and I just left it for now so I could figure it out as I went. And of course, I stitched that in place, making sure to maneuver the fabric as I went to avoid tucks and undesired pleats. Next, I trimmed the seam allowances and zigzagged the raw edge before I pressed the waistband seam allowances up towards the bodice.
Okay, so I've been working on the skirt, or the dress, I guess, and I have a couple of things like notes already that I want to share with you. First thing is that it's looking very cute. I'm really happy with it. I'm happy with the all-in-one facing. That's worked out perfectly. I like the little pleat that I did at the front. Obviously, I knew I was going to have more room because the top is kind of like a straight sort of thing, and the skirt is obviously more fitted. I just tried this on, and this fabric is quite stretchy, and also from what I've managed to try on, I think that all of this can be kind of eliminated and it will be like a nice tight fit. However, I do want to do a left zipper because I only have this zipper tape stuff that you can buy by the meter, and then you have to insert the zipper, but this isn't like an invisible zip. It's very much like a normal zipper. I used my ruler to draw a line tapering from the top of the bodice to the waistline so that I could chop off that excess without it looking weird, and I used the cutoff piece from the first side as a pattern for the second side.
Next, I inserted the zipper pull into the tape. You can do this once you've already sewn the zipper tape into both sides of the garment, but I don't like doing that because I'm not good at getting the zipper pull into the tape and it always ends up wonky, so I prefer to add the pull now and have to kind of wrangle with it while I sew it into this fabric rather than have a breezy sewing experience that then ends in tears when my waistband seam doesn't match. I do have a little tip. You can cut off a little bit of the zipper teeth on one side and that makes it a bit easier to get the pull into the tape. Anyway, once I had that pull in place, I used magic clips at the edges of the zipper so that I can't get the pull out. I learned that one the hard way. But yes, the lap zipper. I start by sewing the zipper to one side of the opening edges like I would normally, using my zipper foot to make life easier. Here I realized that I should have zigzagged the raw edges of these opening edges before I started attaching the zipper, so I quickly did the side with the zipper already as well as the other side. Next, I pressed about 2 centimeters or just under an inch of the other opening edge to form a lapped bit of the lapped zipper. Then I could pin the other edge of the zipper to this remaining opening edge, matching the edge of the zipper tape with the zigzag edge of the fabric and making sure that the waistlines are aligned. I stitched that in place and there you go. You can now flip the dress right side out and you have a lapped zipper. Now, to make sure that this stays put, I'm actually going to top stitch that because I don't trust this fabric. So I just top stitched down the side of the lapped edge, making sure that I am catching the zipper tape, and I also top stitched on the other side just because I thought it would look cute. Then I pressed that in place and closed the center back seam. I think usually you would close the seam and then do the lap zipper, but I don't really do these super often, so I'm not 100% sure on that one. Either way, this worked out fine for me. I just had to make sure that the center back seam lined up with the zipper seams to avoid a weird bump at the end of the zipper, but I have to do that anyway, so. After I had pressed the center back seam allowances open, I started working on the hem. I'm just doing a very simple narrow hem here where I fold the fabric up twice for a total of about 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch, and then I top stitch that in place. The original design from Gertie's book calls for 6 decorative buttons, 3 on each shoulder seam, but because these are merely decorative, I actually decided to go for some cool beads instead. I decided on these really big flower sequins that I've had in my stash for over a year, and I have never found a project that I could use them for. They have a really cool iridescent finish and they come in tons of different colors, so I picked one of each color and added that to the dress. I used doubled up thread and a regular sharp needle to sew these down, starting with pulling the thread up towards the right side of the fabric, then adding the sequin and a small white bead to lock the sequin in place, and then pulling the thread back to the wrong side. Bonus points, the white bead just looks like the center of the flower, so it all works out. I repeated that for all 6 of my flowers and then I was ready for the reveal.
That is the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoyed making this dress. I think it looks super cute. I love the flowers as well. I think the flowers are so cute. If you did like that video, maybe consider subscribing to my channel, leaving this video a like, and leaving me a comment telling me what you thought about it, or like other things you might want me to make, or are you trying to, get your stash down as well? What are your plans for sewing in the summer? Anything you want to tell me. I'm happy to chat about all things sewing and crafting in general, so let me know in the comments. You may also want to consider following me on Instagram or TikTok or both. I usually post on there every single day. I'll post about what I'm making. If you are interested in that, I'll leave it all linked below. But yeah, that's everything for today. Thank you so much for watching and happy sewing.